There is a moment most people recognize. You find yourself in a relationship, romantic, professional, close friendship, and you notice you are doing something familiar. The same anxiety, the same pull toward distance, the same cycle of seeking and retreating, and somewhere underneath the frustration, there is a question that doesn't quite get asked. Why do I keep doing this? The answer, for most people, lies in something they've rarely been given a clear framework to understand. Your earliest relationships with the people who cared for you as an infant and child didn't just matter emotionally in the moment. They taught your nervous system what relationships are, what to expect, whether connection is safe or dangerous, whether your needs will be met or ignored, whether closeness is a source of comfort or threat. That learning happened before language, before conscious memory, and it has been operating largely outside your awareness in every significant relationship you have had since. Attachment theory gives us the clearest framework we have for understanding this. Over the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to go through it fully, where the theory comes from, what the 4 styles actually look like, how they develop, and what they mean for your relationships right now. Attachment theory was developed by British psychiatrist John Bowlby in the 1950s and 1960s. Bowlby was working with children who had been separated from their parents during the Second World War and was struck by the profound emotional consequences of that disruption. He proposed something that was, at the time, controversial, that human beings have a primary biological drive toward emotional closeness, not just toward food or physical comfort. Bowlby argued that children come into the world biologically primed to seek proximity to a caregiver. This is not just preference, it is survival. An infant who cannot maintain closeness to a protective adult is, in evolutionary terms, extremely vulnerable. The attachment system, the neural and emotional circuitry that drives us toward connection and sounds the alarm when connection is threatened, is therefore among the most ancient and powerful systems in the human brain. Mary Ainsworth, a developmental psychologist working alongside Bowlby, conducted the research that gave us the first empirical map of attachment. Her Strange Situation study, in which infants were briefly separated from their caregiver and then reunited, identified 3 initial attachment patterns in children: secure, anxious ambivalent, and avoidant. A 4th pattern, disorganized, was later identified by Mary Main and Judith Solomon. Decades of subsequent research have confirmed that these patterns don't remain in childhood. They become what Bowlby called internal working models, mental representations of how relationships work, what to expect from others, and what you deserve. And they travel with you into adulthood, shaping every significant relationship you have. Secure attachment forms when a caregiver is consistently warm, responsive, and emotionally available. Not perfect. Consistency is not the same as perfection. Secure caregivers get things wrong. They misread their child. They have bad days. What matters is that ruptures are repaired. The child learns. When things go wrong between us, we find our way back. That is the foundation of trust. A securely attached child uses the caregiver as a safe base from which to explore. They can move out into the world with curiosity and return to the caregiver for comfort when distressed. They protest separation, but are genuinely soothed by reunion. In adult relationships, secure attachment looks like this: the ability to trust without excessive anxiety, to communicate needs directly without either suppressing them or overwhelming others with them, to tolerate conflict without catastrophizing, and to offer genuine care without losing a stable sense of self. Securely attached adults can be close without being consumed by closeness. They can be alone without being driven by loneliness. Research consistently shows that secure attachment in adults correlates with relationship satisfaction, communication quality, resilience in the face of relationship stress, and overall psychological well-being. It is not, however, the most common attachment style in the population. Studies suggest roughly 50 to 55% of adults have a secure attachment orientation, which means the other 45 to 50% are navigating relationships with one of the insecure patterns. Anxious attachment, sometimes called anxious preoccupied in the adult literature, forms when caregiving has been inconsistent. Not necessarily harsh or neglectful, but unreliable. The caregiver's warmth and availability fluctuated in ways the child could not predict, sometimes responsive, sometimes withdrawn, sometimes present, sometimes emotionally unavailable even when physically there. In this environment, the child cannot relax. They learn, I must monitor this relationship constantly. I can never be sure of my place in it. The attachment system remains chronically activated because the signal of safety never arrives reliably enough to switch it off. In adult relationships, anxious attachment produces a cluster of experiences that can feel overwhelming from the inside. A heightened sensitivity to relational signals, small changes in tone, a slower than usual text reply, a moment of emotional distance, are amplified into potential threats. The nervous system reads them as evidence of withdrawal, rejection, or impending abandonment. The response is pursuit, seeking reassurance, over-communicating, or escalating emotionally in an attempt to re-establish connection. Anxiously attached adults often describe knowing rationally that their response is disproportionate and being unable to regulate it anyway. This is because the response is not coming from the rational brain. It is coming from a nervous system that learned, very early on, that connection is unreliable and that vigilance is the only way to protect it. Anxious attachment is also deeply linked to self-worth. The internal message, often unconscious, is, I am not quite enough. Other people are the source of my value. Their approval is the evidence that I matter. This creates an orientation in relationships that is fundamentally anxious, always checking, always adjusting, never quite settled. Please subscribe to this channel if this is landing for you. This week we are covering every dimension of this in shorter videos too. Avoidant attachment, called dismissing avoidant in adult attachment research, forms in a different kind of early environment. Rather than inconsistency, the child experiences consistent emotional unavailability. Caregivers who are uncomfortable with emotional expression, who respond to distress by withdrawing rather than soothing, or who communicate, explicitly or implicitly, that needs are burdensome or excessive. The child adapts by deactivating the attachment system. They learn to need less, feel less, and rely on no one. Independence becomes both a survival strategy and an identity. This child is often described as easy, not fussy, not needy, not demanding. What is less visible is the emotional world being suppressed beneath that containment. In adult relationships, avoidant attachment produces a distinct and often misunderstood profile. A preference for independence that can read as not caring. Discomfort with emotional intimacy that becomes more pronounced as relationships deepen. A tendency to mentally and emotionally withdraw when a partner needs closeness. A subtle but persistent sense that other people are either too needy or simply cannot be trusted. Avoidantly attached adults often report that emotional conversations feel suffocating. Requests for more closeness are experienced as intrusion. They may function excellently in professional contexts with a sense of competence and self-sufficiency, but find that intimacy consistently hits a ceiling they cannot seem to raise. One crucial thing to understand about avoidant attachment is this: the absence of visible distress does not mean the absence of need. Research using physiological measures, heart rate, skin conductance, cortisol levels, shows that avoidantly attached adults have the same stress responses to relational threat as anxiously attached adults. They simply do not show it. The suppression is real, but the underlying need for connection is equally real. Disorganized attachment, also called fearful avoidant in adult literature, is the least common and most complex of the four patterns. It develops in environments where the primary caregiver was simultaneously the source of safety and the source of threat. This occurs in homes where there is abuse, severe neglect, or significant untreated trauma in the caregiver. The child faces an impossible neurological dilemma. Their survival system drives them toward the caregiver for safety, but that caregiver is frightening. So the attachment system fires in two directions simultaneously: approach and avoidance, closeness and terror, producing what Ainsworth and Main described as fear without solution. The behavioral result in infants is literally disorganized: freezing, moving in incomplete circles, approaching the caregiver while looking away. In adults, disorganized attachment produces the most turbulent relational experience: an intense simultaneous desire for closeness and fear of it. A tendency to idealize relationships intensely, then to feel suddenly threatened and to withdraw or collapse. Difficulty with trust that is experienced as almost visceral. Extreme responses to perceived rejection. Relationships that oscillate between deep enmeshment and sudden cutoff with very little middle ground. Disorganized attachment is strongly associated with early childhood trauma and with the development of trauma responses in adulthood. It is also strongly associated with complex PTSD because the interpersonal wound that created it, the caregiver as threat, fundamentally disrupts the capacity to use relationships as a source of regulation. Healing from disorganized attachment almost always benefits from professional therapeutic support. Not because it is impossible to change, but because the wound is relational, and the most effective healing is relational too. Understanding the four styles academically is one thing. Recognizing them in the texture of your actual relationships is another. Let's make this concrete. Attachment style shapes partner selection. Research consistently shows that we are disproportionately attracted to people who recreate a familiar emotional feeling, even when that feeling is anxious, uncertain, or painful. An anxiously attached person often finds secure partners boring and avoidant partners compelling. The avoidant partner's emotional distance feels like the familiar conditional love of early caregiving. It is recognizable as something that feels like home, even if home was painful. Attachment style shapes behavior under relational stress. When conflict or distance arrives in a relationship, your attachment system activates, and you respond with whatever strategy you learned. The anxious attacher pursues, escalates emotionally, seeks reassurance, makes the rupture impossible to ignore. The avoidant attacher withdraws, goes quiet, becomes logical, creates physical or emotional distance. The combination of anxious and avoidant in a relationship is one of the most common and most painful pairings in the clinical literature. Each person's strategy activates the other's deepest wound. Attachment style shapes interpretation. The same ambiguous moment is read entirely differently by an anxiously attached person and an avoidant one. A partner who needs an hour alone to decompress after work is experienced by an anxious attacher as withdrawal and rejection, and by an avoidant attacher as reasonable and appropriate. Neither interpretation is objective. Both are filtered through the internal working model built decades earlier. You don't repeat the past literally, you repeat the emotional feeling of it, and you recruit new people to confirm old beliefs. Understanding this is not depressing. It is the beginning of being able to do something different. Here is what I want to leave you with. Attachment theory is not a system for diagnosing what is wrong with you. It is a framework for understanding why certain patterns in your relationships feel so inevitable, so resistant to your best intentions, so deeply entrenched despite your genuine desire to do things differently. The pattern was not your fault. It was built in conditions you did not choose, by a nervous system doing the only thing it knew how to do: adapt to the environment it was given. A child cannot choose its caregivers. A child cannot choose the emotional environment it is formed in. What a child can do is adapt with extraordinary intelligence and speed. And that is exactly what you did. The cost of that adaptation is showing up now. In your relationships, in your nervous system's responses to closeness and conflict, in the stories you tell yourself about whether you are enough, whether others can be trusted, whether safety is real. But here is the crucial thing that the research is very clear on. Attachment styles are not fixed. They are not life sentences. They are patterns, and patterns can change. The concept of earned security describes adults who did not start from a secure base, but who built one through subsequent relationships, through therapeutic work, through the accumulating experience of being consistently seen and not abandoned. That process takes time. It takes real relationships. It takes a willingness to do things differently, even when everything in your nervous system is screaming the old strategy at you. But it is available to anyone, including you. This is Series 7 of Healing Through Thoughts. We're covering attachment styles all week. Please subscribe so you don't miss it. And if this video helped you understand something you've been carrying for a long time, share it with one person who might need it too. Take good care.